Wedding planners, what made you say, "This one's not even going to last a year"? Minister friend did a wedding once where in the vows the woman wouldn't say, "for richer or poorer," just kept saying, "for richer or richer," and she wasn't joking. They didn't last long. Even as a joke, that is inappropriate, sure, at the rehearsal whatever, but during the actual wedding? Come on, I am not a big fan of weddings, but that is too much. I had a wedding couple come to see me by appointment to plan the music for their church wedding ceremony. They each brought their respective mothers to the planning session. Right out of the gate, they started arguing over choices for the processional. The groom-to-be wanted something to show off the full organ, whereas the bride-to-be wanted something smaller scaled and gentle. There was no middle ground, no matter what organ pieces I showed them. Then, of course, their mothers took sides and further intensified their bickering, even though I asked them politely to let the couple choose their own selections. In the end, it really wasn't about the choice of music. It was about a fundamental crack in the foundation of their soon-to-be marriage, an unwillingness to compromise or to even hear what the other was attempting to convey. Sadly, their marriage ended in divorce in less than 2 years. How they made it that long I'll never know. Not a planner, but a photographer. Bride and groom both lovely people, but the groom's mother. At the reception she got so drunk that she leaned over in her chair and just puked on the floor. She spent the next 2 hours wailing and crying because she, told everybody, thought her son deserved better. As I was packing equipment back into my car, I spotted Emile in the bushes, dress around her head, legs in the air, and a group of people trying to get her out. I later found out that she shit herself at a later point in the evening and the bride spent time cleaning her up. Didn't think the marriage would survive with a toxic Emile like that around. Then I saw on social media that the bride and groom moved overseas, far away from their families. So, how crazy is your mother again? About let's move to Uzbekistan crazy? Oh man. The poor bride was 6 months pregnant at the time of the wedding, puking regularly. The groom was 3 hours late to the ceremony. By hour 2, he hadn't even picked up his tux. The venue almost cancelled the reception because the groom's number was the only contact they had and nobody knew what was going on. He finally showed up and everything went as planned, albeit 3 hours later. My mom was 2 hours late to her wedding. She got stuck in nasty traffic and then spent a good 45 minutes trying to get out of the car. She had one of those huge hoop skirts. No idea how she got into the car in the first place, but she was just stuck and her parents and her were dying laughing. Meanwhile, my dad's in the church, freaking out thinking his bride ran away. They've been married for 30 years now. I'm not a wedding planner, though I was a wedding guest. The bride had a father who was mortgaging his home to pay for the wedding. She had been given everything as a child and became accustomed to life on a silver platter. She worked for Christian Dior in makeup sales and therefore insisted everything must be designer. She had a destination wedding that lasted a month at a villa in Italy. More than 50 people flew out, and she had designer dresses and accessory for every single planned event for an entire month. There were non-stop events planned. She was the star of everything. Her husband was an afterthought, and only beckoned for pictures when her personal photographer reminded her that they should take some together. The extravagance of the wedding put my estimate at 2 years tops. They made it about 2 years, pregnancy likely playing a big part in the longevity of the 2-year marriage. The father of the bride ended up living in the spare room of her condo with her and her new husband because the fathers of the bride had a wife that was not the bride's mother, and the cost of the wedding was so outrageous that they divorced over it. Father of the bride was a sales rep for a medical company, not a millionaire. Bride gives no fucks because everything is about her and what she wants regardless of who it harms or affects. Rule of thumb: the more extravagant the wedding, the more likely they are compensating for a hollow relationship. Holy hell. You know your wedding is a disaster when it ruins someone else's marriage. I worked the most amazing wedding ever. The marriage didn't last 6 hours. I was bartending for the reception. Everything seemed pretty typical and standard as guests arrived, drank, and conversed. The wedding party arrived and everything seemed to be completely normal. Everyone was happy, having fun, etc. When it came time for the formalities, the bar closed and everyone took their seats. The speeches began, with the maid of honor and best man. Everything was going as per usual for a wedding until the best man finished his speech and the food began to be served. The groom grabbed the mic after the best man's toast and wished everyone a great night and a nice meal. That's when shit hit the fan. After his well wishes, he asked for the attention of his best man and bride. He told them that he knew they were having sex behind his back for the entirety of the engagement, and that he would be filing for an annulment on Monday. He thanked everyone for coming, and apologized to the father of the bride, saying, "I would have called it off weeks ago, but I figured you would be way more pissed at your little princess when you couldn't get out of the bill for the reception." He turned to his wife and said, "Fuck you," then turned to his best friend and said, "From what I overheard, my dick is still bigger than yours." The night before our wedding, my husband and I were staying at the hotel we would be getting married at the next day. Another couple had gotten married there that night, and our room happened to be right next to theirs. The couple had decided to continue the party in their room, blasting music, screaming at their friends from the balcony, and generally making so much noise at such a late time that we called the front desk. The next night, our own wedding was done. We were hanging out in our room, gorging on leftover cupcakes, and getting ready to go to bed. The couple next to us, it turns out, had decided to stay an extra night. But this time they were screaming at each other. We couldn't figure out what exactly was going on, but we clearly heard the woman yell, "I can't talk to you when you have your pouty face." 3 years later we still use that on each other, and it instantly diffuses any argument. I often wonder what happened to them. Years ago I was a waitress at a fancy restaurant where we regularly had weddings. One night we had this massive wedding party. His side were one of those families with loads of money but not an ounce of class. Just rowdy, loud and incredibly rude, making sure to let everyone know how rich they were. She was a quiet, shy girl with a small family full of boring mousy types. As the night progressed, his family just got drunker and louder as hers hid in the corners, visibly annoyed. At one stage the groom grabbed the microphone and did a heavily intoxicated version of Frank Sinatra's My Way whilst his whole family cheered him on. Afterwards he turned to his bride and slurred over the speakers, "Tonight, we will do it my way, wifey," and then proceeded to make doggy-style thrusting gestures. The bride flushed bright red, got up and walked out, her mum on her heels. She didn't come back. The groom stayed and got so trashed his disgusting family had to carry him out at the end of the night. It was spectacular. They didn't last long. Not a wedding planner, but tomorrow a friend's 18-year-old sister is getting married to a 33-year-old man with 2 kids after being engaged for 3 weeks. I have a very bad feeling about the marriage. Hope I'm wrong and it lasts, but the whole thing gives me a creepy vibe. So he basically is marrying a babysitter. Had a wedding I coordinated where the bride literally went from this sweet, kind and very fun person to a meltdown-laden bridezilla. It was bad. I knew it wasn't going to last the moment she arrived at the venue. She tore up the guest list and was furious at the groom because his family, most of them either elderly and disabled, weren't at the ceremony yet. They were 5 minutes late, and parking was awful. So she decided to start the ceremony even though they weren't there yet. The groom had zero say as he was a really quiet guy. During the bridal procession down the aisle, people kept arriving and having to walk down the aisle to get to their seats. She insulted each member of his family as they would enter the venue. Then, during the actual vows, the groom was so terrified, he literally couldn't look at her. Instead, he did his vows while looking at the minister. She grabbed his face mid-vows, pointed his face to hers, then said, "Do them over, now!" Probably the most cringe-worthy moment I've ever seen in my entire career. The guests tried to laugh it off, but we all felt bad for him. The icing on the cake was during the toast. She decided to talk about his mom, then passive-aggressively insult her, then completely insult the crowd, then her new husband. Yes, she was sober. After the dinner, about 75% of the guests just up and left. I catered weddings for several years, and the subtle sign I always paid attention to was how closely the bride and groom sat next to each other during the speeches, dinner, etc. The happy couples were always right on top of each other, sharing food, laughing, and just generally chatting. They were in their own world, while the rest of the wedding went on around them. Other times, the two would be practically on the other side of the table from one another. The groom would spend the whole meal turned away chatting with his groomsmen, while the bride looked the other way staring into space. Families can be a-holes, people get drunk, and nightmares happen, especially as the night progresses. But if you don't care enough to appreciate the presence of your spouse the very first time you sit down next to them, you have no chance once the real world takes over. Do you have a similar story? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.